The crash, the explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun, and Dr. Marcus Cole dropped his coffee cup as he ran to the window of his small research station. He had been alone on this planet for 2 years now, studying plants and animals that no human had ever seen before. And in all that time, nothing exciting had ever happened until tonight. The fireball streaked across the purple clouds and disappeared behind the amber-colored trees that covered most of this world. And Marcus felt the ground shake beneath his feet when whatever it was finally hit the surface. He stood there for a long moment, his heart pounding in his chest. And then he grabbed his emergency pack and headed for the door. The rational part of his brain told him to call Colonial Command first and wait for instructions. But something deeper pushed him forward into the darkness. It took him almost an hour to find the crash site, following the trail of broken trees and scorched earth through the forest. And when he finally reached the wreckage, his blood went cold. The ship was not human. He recognized the design from his studies back on Earth. The curved hull and the strange symbols burned into the metal. And he knew exactly what species had built this vessel. The Vethkai. Every human learned about the Vethkai in school because they were one of the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. Not because they were aggressive conquerors, but because they absolutely refused to interact with other races. They believed that all other species were beneath them, creatures without true honor or moral understanding. And they had killed humans before for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus should have turned around right then and walked back to his station and pretended he had never seen anything. Instead, he climbed through the torn metal of the hull and went inside. Interior of the ship was filled with smoke and the smell of burning chemicals, and emergency lights flickered red and orange as he made his way through the corridors. Found her in what looked like the main control room. She was young, or at least she seemed young to his human eyes, with pale blue skin covered in delicate scales, and forearms that hung limply at her sides. Her eyes were closed and dark blood pooled beneath her body where jagged metal had torn through her torso. Marcus knelt beside her and pressed his fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. And when he felt the faint beating beneath her skin, he made a decision that would change everything. He picked her up as gently as he could and carried her out of the wreckage. The walk back to his station took twice as long because he had to move carefully to avoid hurting her more. And by the time he laid her down on his medical table, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. He stood there looking at her for a moment. This alien creature that belonged to a species that would probably kill him just for touching her. And then he got to work. Marcus was not a medical doctor, but he was a xenobiologist, which meant he knew more about alien anatomy than most humans alive. And he had studied the Vethkai extensively. Out of pure academic curiosity, he never thought that knowledge would save a life. The next several hours were the most intense of his entire existence as he worked to repair damage that should have killed her. Her internal organs were arranged differently than human organs, and her blood was a deep purple color that clotted in ways he did not fully understand. But he adapted and improvised and refused to give up. He synthesized antibiotics using compounds from his research supplies, guessing at the right molecular structure based on what he knew about her. Biology, he sutured wounds using techniques meant for human flesh, adjusting his methods when her skin proved tougher than he expected. He set broken bones and drained fluid from her chest cavity and monitored her vital signs using equipment that was never designed for alien patients. 3 times during that long night he thought he had lost her, and 3 times he brought her back when the sun rose fully on the second day. Marcus finally allowed himself to sit down. He had not slept in over 30 hours, and his hands were still stained with her purple blood. But she was alive, her breathing had stabilized, and her Wounds were no longer bleeding, and the fever that had gripped her body was slowly going down. He should have felt proud of himself, but mostly he just felt tired. Over the next 2 days, he barely left her side, checking her bandages and adjusting her medication and making sure she stayed hydrated through an IV line he had rigged up from his supplies. Talked to her sometimes, even though she could not hear him, telling her about his life on Earth and his family and the reasons he had chosen to come to this lonely outpost on the edge of known space. Maybe he just needed to hear a human voice, even if it was only his own. On the morning of the 3rd day, her eyes opened. They were large and golden, with pupils that contracted to thin slits in the light, and they focused on his face with an intensity that made him take a step backward. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she screamed. The sound was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to vibrate through his skull. And she tried to launch herself off the table toward him, but her body was too weak and her wounds were too fresh, and she collapsed back onto the mattress with a cry of pain. Marcus held up his hands and spoke in the calmest voice he could manage, telling her that she was safe and that he was not going to hurt her and that she needed to rest. She did not understand his words, but something in his tone must have reached her because she stopped screaming. Instead, she lay there staring at him with those golden eyes, her forearms wrapped protectively around her injured torso. And Marcus could see the fear and confusion and anger that swirled behind her gaze. He did not try to approach her again. He simply pulled up a chair and sat down a few feet away from the table, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow. She watched him like a prey animal watches a predator, waiting for him to reveal his true intentions, waiting for the attack she was certain would come. But Marcus just sat there, and eventually, despite her fear and her pain and her absolute certainty that this human meant her harm, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell back into unconscious sleep. Marcus remained in his chair, watching over her through the long hours of the night. He did not know what would happen when she woke up again. He did not know if her people would come looking for her. If her people would come looking for her. Did not know if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life or the best decision he had ever made. All he knew was that she had been dying and he had been able to help. And that was enough. That had to be enough. The stranger's death, the days that followed, were among the strangest of Marcus Cole's life. The alien girl, whose name he would later learn was Silvery, refused to cooperate in any way. She would not eat the food he prepared for her, even though he had carefully researched what nutrients her species required. She would not let him change her bandages without hissing and clicking at him in her strange language. She would not sleep when he was in the room, forcing herself to stay awake until exhaustion dragged her under against her will. And every time he came near her, she tensed her body like she was preparing to fight or flee. Marcus understood her fear even if he could not speak her language to her kind. Humans were little better than animals, creatures without honor or moral understanding, beings that could not be trusted under any circumstances. She was waiting for him to reveal his true purpose, waiting for him to demand payment for saving her life, waiting for the trap to spring shut around Heron Vethkai culture. Nothing was ever given freely. Every gift carried an obligation, and every kindness came with a price. And the bigger the gift, the bigger the debt that was owed. She could not understand why this human was caring for her without asking for anything in return. It had to be a trick. It had to be. Marcus tried everything he could think of to make her comfortable. He moved her to a proper bed instead of the medical table and gave her blankets and pillows that she immediately pushed onto the floor. He left food beside her bed and pretended not to watch as she sniffed it suspiciously and pushed it away. He set up a translation device that slowly began to decode her language. And after 5 days, They could finally exchange simple words. The first thing she said to him was a question. "What do you want from me?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I want you to get better and go home." She stared at him like he had said something completely insane. "That cannot be true," she said through the translator, her voice clicking and hissing in complex patterns that the device converted to simple human words. "No one gives without taking. That is the fundamental law of existence. Maybe for your people," Marcus said quietly, "but not for mine." She shook her head violently, wincing as the motion pulled at her still healing wounds. "You are lying. All creatures lie to gain advantage. You want something from me and you are simply waiting for the right moment to demand it." Marcus did not argue with her because he knew that words would not change her. Mind-only actions could do that, so he continued caring for her exactly as he had been doing. Asking nothing in return, expecting nothing in return, he brought her meals prepared according to Vethkai dietary requirements that he had researched in his database. He changed her bandages with gentle hands and applied medicine to her wounds. He gave her privacy when she needed it and company. When she seemed lonely, he told her about himself because she seemed curious even though she tried to hide. I'd been born on Earth in a small town, surrounded by mountains, and he had always been fascinated by life in all its forms. He had studied biology and then xenobiology, the study of alien life. And when the opportunity came to work on a frontier world, he had taken it without hesitation. "You have no family?" she asked one day, and her voice sounded almost concerned even through the mechanical translator. "My parents died when I was young," Marcus told her, "and I never had brothers or sisters, so no. I have no family waiting for me. That is very sad," she said. And for the first time since she had woken up, there was no suspicion in her eyes, only something that looked almost like sympathy. "It is what it is," Marcus said with a small shrug. "I have my work and my purpose, and that is enough for me." Salavri was quiet for a long time after that. Over the next several days, Marcus noticed that she was watching him differently. She still tensed when he came near, but she no longer looked like she was preparing to attack. She started eating the food he brought her without waiting for him to leave the room. She let him check her wounds without hissing or pulling away, and she started asking questions. She wanted to know about human culture and human history and human values. She wanted to know why humans explored the stars and what they hoped to find. She wanted to know if all humans were like Marcus or if he was somehow unusual. He answered her questions as honestly as he could, telling her about the good parts of humanity and the bad parts too. He told her about human kindness and human cruelty, about human courage and human cowardice, about the capacity for both great love and great hatred that lived in every human heart. "You are very strange," Salavri told him one evening as the twin suns set outside the window, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "How so?" Marcus asked. "You tell me the bad things about your people, the wars and the violence and the cruelty. You do not try to make yourselves seem better than you are. What would be the point of lying?" Marcus said. "You would find out the truth eventually, and then you would never trust anything I said." She tilted her head in that way she did when she was thinking hard about something. "Among my people, we only show strength. We never reveal weakness to outsiders, because weakness can be exploited." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But hiding your weaknesses means hiding part of who you really are. And how can anyone truly know you if you only show them half of yourself?" Salavri did not respond to that, but Marcus could see something shifting behind her golden eyes that night. For the first time since she had arrived, she fell asleep while he was still in the room. She trusted him enough to be vulnerable in his presence. It was a small thing, but it meant more to Marcus than he could express. 2 days later, she finally asked the question that had been haunting her since She first woke up. Why did you save me? You knew what my people think of humans. You knew they might kill you for touching one of our kind. Why did you risk everything for a stranger? Marcus thought about the question for a long time before he answered. Because you were dying, he said finally. And I could help. It is as simple as that. That cannot be the only reason. But it is, Marcus insisted. I saw someone in pain, someone who would die without help. And I had the ability to do something about it. What kind of person would I be if I just walked away? Salavri stared at him with an expression he could not read. Among my people, she said slowly, we have a word for what you describe, but it is only used in old stories. Legends from before we became the civilization we are today. We thought such things were myths. What is the word? Marcus asked, but Salavri did not answer. She simply looked at him with those golden eyes. And for the first time since she had crashed on his world, she did not look at him like he was a strange and dangerous alien. She looked at him like he was something she had never expected to find, something she had been taught did not exist, something impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. And in that moment, without either of them realizing it, everything began to change. The signal on the 14th day since the crash. The alarm in Marcus Cole's research station began to scream. He ran to his monitoring equipment and felt his heart stop when he saw what the sensors had detected. 3 ships had just entered the star system, and their design was unmistakably. Vethke Zelavri appeared in the doorway behind him. Her wounds still bandaged, but her strength mostly returned. And when she saw the readings on the screen, her face went pale. My people, she said quietly. They have come for me. Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing through possibilities and finding none of them good. Your distress beacon, he said. It has been transmitting since the crash. I could not figure out how to turn it off. Salavri walked to the window and looked up at the sky as if she could already see the warships descending through the clouds. You need to leave, she said, and her voice carried an urgency that surprised him. Take your shuttle and go now, before they reach the planet. If they find you here, they will kill you. Marcus turned to look at her. What about you? I will be fine. I am the daughter of a chieftain. They will not harm me. But you... She paused, and something that might have been fear flickered in her golden eyes. Humans are considered omnivoid among my people, creatures incapable of true moral reasoning. If they discover that you touched me and treated my wounds and saw me in my weakness, they will execute you without hesitation. Marcus should have been afraid, and in some ways he was, but mostly he felt a strange calm settle over him as he made his decision. I am not leaving. Isaid Salavri spun to face him. Her forearms gesturing wildly, and what he had learned was a sign of extreme agitation. Did you not hear what I said? They will kill you. This is not an exaggeration or a threat. It is simply what will happen. I heard you, Marcus said. And I am still not leaving. Why? She demanded. What possible reason could you have to stay and die? Marcus looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because if I run away now, everything I told you about humans becomes a lie. I told you that I saved you because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted something in return. But if I abandon you the moment it becomes dangerous, then what was any of it worth? Your life, Salavri said desperately. Your life is what it would be worth. Is that not enough? No, Marcus said quietly. No, it is not. Salavri stared at him like she had never truly seen him before. You are insane, she whispered. You are completely and utterly insane. Maybe, Marcus admitted with a small smile. But I'm also not leaving, so I suggest we figure out what we are going to do when your people arrive. They had less than an hour before the ships would reach the planet and land. Salavri spent most of that time pacing back and forth across the small station. her mind clearly working through possibilities that Marcus could not even imagine. He used the time to clean himself up and put on his best clothes, figuring that if he was going to meet his death, he should at least look presentable. There might be a way, Celery said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the room. But it is very old and very dangerous, and I do not know if it will work. Tell me. Marcus said. She turned to face him, and her expression was more serious than he had ever seen it. Among my people, there is an ancient rite called Valtheric. The dead of flesh. It has not been invoked in 3,000 years, but it still exists in our oldest laws. What does it mean? Celery took a deep breath before answering. The Valtheric states that if someone saves a life without demanding payment, without expecting reciprocity, without any hope of reward, then that person has committed an act so profound that it cannot be repaid through normal means. The debt becomes sacred, eternal, unbreakable. Marcus frowned in confusion. I thought you said your people do not believe in giving without receiving. We do not. Celery agreed. Which is why the Valtheric is considered almost mythological. It describes something that should not exist according to our understanding of how the universe works. But it does exist, Marcus said slowly. In your laws, yes, it exists as a relic of a time before we became what we are now. A reminder of beliefs we have long since abandoned. But it is still law, and if I invoke it, she paused. If I invoke it and can prove that what you did meets the requirements of the rite, then even my people cannot harm you without dishonoring themselves. You think you can prove it? Celery looked at him with something complicated in her eyes. I know I can. Because I have watched you for 14 days, and I have seen who you truly are. You are not like anything my people believe humans to be. You are. She struggled to find the words. You are what we thought was impossible. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of engines filled the air, and through the window he could see the first Vethkai ship descending through the clouds. Stay behind me, Salvry said as she moved toward the door. Do not speak unless I tell you to speak. Do not move unless I tell you to move. And whatever happens, do not show fear. I am afraid. Marcus admitted quietly. Salavri paused at the door and looked back at him. I know, she said, but do not let them see it. Fear is weakness, and weakness invites death among my kind. The door opened and they walked out together to meet their fate. The Vethkai warriors were already forming a perimeter around the station. Tall and armored and carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy there. Leader was a scarred veteran named Kethril, who had clearly seen many battles. And when he saw Marcus standing beside Celavri, his eyes narrowed with cold fury. Step away from the human. Child, Kethril commanded in a voice that expected instant obedience. We will deal with this creature. But Celavri did not step away. Instead, she moved directly in front of Marcus, placing her body between him and the weapons pointed in their direction. I invoke Valtheric, she said, and her voice rang out clear and strong across the gathered warriors. I invoke the dead of flesh in accordance with the old laws, and I name this human as the holder of a sacred obligation that cannot be repaid. Silence fell over the clearing like a physical waketh. Rahl stared at her in disbelief. That rite has not been invoked in 3,000 years, which does not make it any less binding. Celavri responded, check the archives if you doubt me. The law still stands. The law was not written for humans, another warrior spat. They have no honor. They cannot participate in our sacred rites. The law does not specify species, Celavri countered. It specifies actions. And this human has performed actions that meet every requirement of the Valtheric. Impossible. Kethril, growled. Celavri lifted her shirt to reveal the scars on her torso. Still pink and healing, but clearly visible. This human found me dying in the wreckage of my ship. He carried me to his home and spent 3 days and 3 nights saving my life using nothing but basic medical supplies and his own knowledge. He asked for nothing in return. He expected nothing in return. He knew that my people might kill him for his actions, and he did them anyway. She let her shirt fall and stared at Kethril with defiance burning in her eyes. Tell me, Commander, what part of that does not meet the requirements of Valtheric? The warriors looked at each other with uncertainty in their eyes. They had come here expecting to find a simple situation. Their chieftain's daughter held captive by a human who could be killed without consequence. What they found instead was something. None of them knew how to handle. Kethril was silent for a long moment before he finally spoke. This will be decided by the council, he said slowly. Both of you will come with us to the homeworld. Salavri nodded. That is acceptable. As they were escorted toward the waiting ships, Marcus leaned close to Salavri and whispered, "What happens now?" "Now," she said quietly, "we find out if my people are still capable of honoring their own laws, or if they have truly forgotten everything they once believed." And as the ships lifted off and the planet fell away beneath them, Marcus realized that his life was now in the hands of beings who had been taught from birth that humans were worth less than nothing. All he could do was hope that Salavri was right about what she had seen in him. All he could do was hope that truth still meant something among the stars. The judgment, the journey to the Vethkai homeworld, took 6 days, and during that time Marcus was kept in a small cell aboard the warship. They did not mistreat him, but they did not acknowledge him either, bringing food and water without speaking and refusing to answer any of his questions. He had no idea what was happening to Salavri, or whether she was safe, or whether invoking the Valtheric had made things better or worse for her. All he could do was wait and hope, and try not to let the fear consume him. When the ship finally landed and the door to his cell opened, Marcus was escorted out by 4 armed guards who watched his every movement like they expected him to attack at any moment. What he saw when he stepped outside took his breath away. The Vethkai homeworld was beautiful, beyond anything he had imagined, with towering crystal spires that caught the light of their blue sun, and gardens filled with plants in colors that had no names in any human language. The architecture was elegant and ancient, clearly built by a civilization that had been spacefaring for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. They led him through streets lined with Vethkai, who stopped to stare as he passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust to something that might have been fear. He was the first human to ever set foot on this world, and everyone seemed to know. Yet the council chamber was located in the largest building Marcus had ever seen, a structure that seemed to be grown from a single massive crystal that pulsed with soft inner light inside. The chamber was filled with hundreds of Vethkai seated in ascending rows that surrounded a central platform. And at the far end sat 12 figures on elevated thrones, who could only be the council elder. Salavri was already there. Standing to one side with her father beside her, the chieftain was an imposing figure with scales that had turned silver, with age and eyes that held the weight of many difficult decisions. He looked at Marcus with an expression that was impossible to read. "The human will approach," one of the elders announced, and Marcus was pushed forward onto the central platform where everyone could see him clearly. Had never felt so small in his entire life. The proceedings that followed were unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Different council members stood and argued for and against his execution, their voices rising and falling in the clicking, hissing language of the Lethkaith translation device they had given him. Worked hard to keep up, feeding him fragments of the debate. Humans are honor void. The laws of Valtheric do not apply to them. The law does not specify species. To ignore it would be to dishonor ourselves. One act of kindness does not change what they are. Perhaps what they are is not what we assumed. Back and forth it went for hours and then days, with different factions presenting arguments and counter-arguments, while Marcus stood on the platform and tried not to collapse from exhaustion. They gave him food and water and short breaks to rest, but mostly he was expected to stand there in silence while his fate was decided by beings who had been taught that his entire species was beneath contempt. On the third day, the debate was interrupted by the arrival of a figure that made every Vethkai in the chamber rise to their feet in respect. She was ancient, older than anyone Marcus had ever seen, with scales that had faded to pure white and eyes that were clouded with blindness. But despite her age and her inability to see, she moved with a dignity and authority that silenced the entire room. The High Matriarch had come to render judgment. She was led to a seat at the center of the council, and she sat there in silence for a long moment, her blind eyes turned in Marcus's direction as if she could see him through some sense that humans did not possess. Bring the human closer, she commanded, and her voice was surprisingly strong for one so old. Marcus was led forward until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that he could see the countless years etched into every line of her face. I have listened to this debate for 3 days, the matriarch said, and I have heard many arguments about law and tradition and the nature of honor. But I have not heard the one thing that matters most. She leaned forward in her seat. I have not heard from the human himself. A murmur ran through the crowd at this unprecedented statement, but no one dared to object. Tell me, human, the matriarch continued, when you found our child broken and bleeding in the wreckage of her ship, what did you feel? Marcus thought about the question carefully before answering. He could have lied or said something diplomatic or tried to present himself in the best possible light. Instead, he told the truth. I felt afraid, he said, and his voice echoed through the silent chamber. I was afraid that I would not be able to save her, afraid that I would make mistakes and cause her more harm, afraid of what might happen to me if I helped her, and afraid of what kind of person I would become if I did not. The matriarch listened without expression, and yet despite this fear, you acted anyway. Yes. Why? Marcus took a deep breath. Because fear is not a reason to let someone die. Because she needed help and I could provide it. Because walking away would have been the easy choice, and easy choices are not always the right choices. The matriarch was silent for a long moment. Among my people, she said finally, we have built our entire civilization on the principle of reciprocity. Every action must have an equal response. Every gift must be repaid. Every debt must be honored. We believe this is the natural order of the universe. She tilted her head slightly. But you did not act according to this principle. You gave without expectation of receiving. You risked without hope of reward. You showed kindness to one who belonged to a species that has shown your kind nothing but contempt. Yes, Marcus said simply. Why? The matriarch asked again. And this time, her voice carried something that sounded almost like desperation. Help me understand why. Marcus thought about all the ways he could answer that question. He thought about talking about human values and human culture and human philosophy, but in the end he could only offer the simple truth, because that is what it means to be good, he said. Not to be good when it is easy, or when someone is watching, or when you expect something in return, but to be good when it is hard and scary, and you have everything to lose and nothing to gain. He paused. I did not save Savri because I wanted something from her, or because I thought her people would reward me. I saved her because she was dying, and I could help. And that was reason enough. The chamber was completely silent. The matriarch sat back in her seat, and her blind eyes stared at something far beyond the walls of the council chamber. Something that only she could see. 3,000 years ago, she said finally, before my people became what we are now. We had a word for what you describe. We called it grace. The giving of gifts that cannot be earned and cannot be repaid. The offering of mercy to those who do not deserve it. She rose slowly to her feet. We abandoned that concept because we thought it was weakness. We built our entire civilization on strength and reciprocity and honor defined by transaction. And we convinced ourselves that we were better for it. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. But now, I stand in the presence of a being from a species we considered beneath contempt. And he has shown me something I thought was lost forever. He has shown me that grace still exists in this universe, even if we have forgotten how to practice it ourselves. She turned to address the entire council. I have made my judgment. This human has fulfilled the requirements of Valtheric, not because he sought to fulfill them, but because he acted according to a nature that we did not believe was possible. The debt cannot be repaid because he did not act in order to create a debt. Her next words fell like thunder in the silent chamber. He acted out of love, pure and unconditional, and expecting nothing in return. And that is something we have not seen among our own kind for 3,000 years. She turned back to Marcus. You will not be executed. Human, you will not be punished or imprisoned or sent away. Instead, you will be honored, because you have given my people a gift more valuable than anything we could have imagined. What gift? Marcus asked quietly. The matriarch smiled. And despite her age and her blindness, it was the most beautiful expression Marcus had ever seen. You have reminded us who we used to be, she said. And you have shown us who we could become again. The chamber erupted into chaos as the implications of her words sank in. But Marcus barely heard any of it, was looking at Celavri across the room. And she was looking back at him with tears streaming down her face, and in that moment, he knew that everything was going to be different now. Everything was going to change. The Unthinkable. The ceremony took place 3 days after the High Matriarch made her judgment, and it was witnessed by more Vethkai than had gathered in one place for over 1,000 years. They came from every colony and every outpost and every ship in the fleet, all of them wanting to see the impossible thing that was about to happen. Marcus Cole, a human from Earth, was about to be adopted into the Vethkai people. The ritual was ancient and sacred, unchanged since before the Vethkai had left their homeworld to travel. Among the stars, they painted symbols on his skin using dyes made from flowers that grew nowhere else in the galaxy. They draped him in robes woven from fabrics that had been passed down through generations. They spoke words in a language so old that most Vethkai no longer understood their meaning. And when it was done, when the final words had been spoken and the final rituals completed, Marcus was no longer simply a human. He was Vethkai kinbound to the tribe by laws more ancient than human. Civilization protected by their warriors and welcomed into their homes and entitled to their defense as if he had been born among them. Celavri stood beside him throughout the ceremony, and when the High Matriarch declared it complete, she stepped forward and took his hand. By the old ways and the new, she said in a voice that rang across the gathered crowd, I claim this human as my brother. His enemies are my enemies. His triumphs are my triumphs. His life is bound to mine for as long as we both draw breath. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly at first, but building like a wave, they began to cheer. Marcus stood there in the center of that impossible moment, surrounded by beings who had been taught to hate everything he was. And he felt tears running down his face. He had never had a family. He had grown up alone, made his way through life alone, come to a distant planet to work alone. And now, in the most unexpected way possible, he finally belonged somewhere. But the matriarch was not finished when the ceremony ended and the crowds began to disperse. She called together a meeting of the full council, along with representatives from the United Earth Coalition, who had arrived just days before. The humans had come expecting to negotiate for Marcus's release. prepared to offer trade agreements and political concessions in exchange for one of their own. They found instead was something none of them could have anticipated. For 200 years, the matriarch said to the gathered representatives, "The Vethkai have refused contact with your species. We believed you were honor void, incapable of moral reasoning, unworthy of treaty or respect." She paused. "We were wrong." The human ambassador, a woman named Sarah Chun, who had spent her entire career preparing for first contact with hostile alien species, sat in stunned silence. "This man," the matriarch continued, gesturing to Marcus, "has shown us that we judged your people by your worst examples rather than your best. He has demonstrated that humans are capable of the highest virtues. Virtues that we ourselves had forgotten were possible." She rose from her seat. "I propose something that has never happened in the history of our people. I propose an exchange. Vethkai observers will travel to human worlds to live among you and learn your ways. Human researchers will be welcomed on Vethkai worlds to study alongside our scholars." The council chamber buzzed with shocked whispers. "This is unprecedented," one of the elders said. "We have never allowed outsiders into our society. And look where that isolation has led us," the matriarch responded. "We have become so focused on our own ways that we forgot there are other ways of being. We have become so certain of our own righteousness that we closed ourselves off from anything that might challenge our assumptions." She looked at Marcus. "This human challenged our assumptions simply by being who he is. Imagine what we might learn if we allowed ourselves to truly know his people." The debate that followed lasted for hours. But in the end, the council voted to accept the matriarch's proposal. Diplomatic channels that had been closed for 2 centuries were reopened. Treaties were drafted and signed for the first time in living memory. Vethkai and humans would live and work together as equals. 3 weeks later, Marcus returned to Research Outpost Kepler 7. The small station looked exactly as he had left it. The same equipment and the same supplies and the same amber forest visible through the windows, but everything felt different now because he was not alone. Selavery had requested assignment as his official research partner, and the council had approved her request without hesitation. She was the first Vethkai in history to formally work alongside a human, and she intended to make the most of the opportunity. "It is strange," she said, as they watched the twin suns set over the forest on their first evening back. 6 weeks ago, I crashed on this planet and thought I was going to die. And now everything is different. Different how? Marcus Eskedsalavri was quiet for a moment. "Before I met you, I knew exactly what the universe was and how it worked. I knew that my people were superior and that other species were beneath us and that honor was the only thing that mattered." She turned to look at him. "But you showed me that there are things more important than honor. Things like kindness and compassion and grace. You showed me that giving without expecting anything in return is not weakness. It is the greatest strength of all." Marcus smiled. "I did not do anything special. I just did what anyone should do when they see someone in trouble. But that is exactly what makes it special." Salvary insisted. "Among my people, we would never help a stranger without expecting something in return. We would never risk ourselves for someone we did not know. We would never give without counting the cost." She shook her head in wonder. "You did all of those things without even thinking about it. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. And that is what changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Vethkai observers were making their way to human worlds, ready to learn and explore and challenge their own assumptions. Somewhere out there, human researchers were being welcomed on Vethkai planets for the first time in history. And somewhere out there, the story of a lone xenobiologist who saved an alien girl was being told and retold, spreading across the galaxy like ripples on a pond. Marcus did not know what the future would bring. He did not know if the Newfound peace between their peoples would last, or if old prejudices would eventually tear it apart. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had made a choice that night when he found Celavri's crashed ship in the forest. He had chosen to help her even though it was dangerous, even though it was scary, even though every rational part of his brain told him to walk away. And that choice had changed the course of history, not because he was special or powerful or important, but because he was kind, because he saw someone in pain and he could not bring himself to leave them behind, because sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can echo across the stars. Celavri's voice broke into his thoughts. Marcus. Yes. Thank you for everything. He looked at her. This alien who had become his sister, and he smiled. You do not need to thank me. I know, she said. But I want to, because among my people we believe that words have power. And I want you to know that what you did mattered. It mattered to me, and it mattered to my people, and it mattered to the entire galaxy. Marcus did not know what to say to that, so instead he just sat there beside her, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast darkness above. He thought about how strange the universe was, how a single moment could change everything, how one person's kindness could reshape the destiny of entire civilizations. He thought about his parents who had died when he was young, and how much he wished they could see him now. He thought about all the lonely years he had spent, never really belonging anywhere, never really having a place to call home. And then he looked at Celavri, his sister, his friend, and he realized that he was not lonely anymore. He had found his family among the stars, and it had all started because he refused to let a Latia stranger die alone. That was the power of humanity, not their technology or their weapons or their ambition, but their capacity to care about others even when it cost them everything. Their ability to love without limits and give without counting. Their stubborn insistence on being kind in a universe that often rewarded cruelty. That was what made them special. That was what made them human, and that was something worth sharing with the stars.